This is a book review of The Wounded Storyteller, Body, Illness and Ethics by Arthur W. Frank. The author is a Professor Emeritus of Sociology at the University of Calgary in Canada. He has written many books and articles based around illness storytelling and ethics. He wrote The Wounded Storyteller almost as a therapy for himself that he describes as self-healing. This book is not a memoir, nor is it a collection of illness stories. Rather, it is a discourse on how an illness experience rewrites chapters of a person's life. How an individual's experience of illness can be retold in many different ways and forms that speak to varied audiences, and that are an expression of the storyteller's journey. The figure of the wounded storyteller is steeped in ancient mythology, yet simple in modern classification. A wounded storyteller is anyone who has suffered and lived to tell the tale. The author is attempting to challenge the social norm of illness as passivity, the person as a victim of disease, toward activity in the act of storytelling to turn fate into experience. Storytelling in this book is not just the written form, but also in the way people tell and retell their stories orally, to family, friends, medical staff, and also how illness stories are told in the media, advertising, and in public health campaigns. I chose to read and review this book because it extends my long-term interest in the human experience of illness. I've long been an avid reader of illness stories and particularly interested in how a person navigates their way through a new language, people, places, their changing body and treatment. I have found this book to be inspirational. Although dense at times, it is full of philosophical and ethical queries that have made me think broadly about how storytelling could be used more effectively in a public health context. The key takeaway from this book is the author's discussion of types of storytelling narrative. Although acknowledging that no individual story conforms exclusively to a particular type of storytelling, the author identifies three basic narratives of illness. Restitution. These narratives anticipate getting well again and give prominence to the technology of cure. Chaos. These narratives recall an illness stretching on forever with no respite or redeeming insights. Quest. These narratives are about finding insight as illness is transformed into a means for the ill person to become someone new. These narrative types are all often combined in storytelling. The imagery of a kaleidoscope is used to explain how the narratives are given one specific form, then the tube shifts and the patterns are reorganised. Cultural and personal preferences are also reflected in each narrative. The restitution narrative type is about the individual's desire to restore health. It is compounded by the expectation that for every suffering there is a remedy, and therefore audiences want to hear restitution stories. It reflects Talcott Parsons' theories of the sick role. Any journey into the kingdom of illness is a limited one, from which return is both expected and possible. The chaos narrative is the opposite of the restitution narrative. It imagines life never getting better. These stories are hard for audiences to hear because they are threatening and fueled with anxiety. The emphasis is on a complete loss of control from all directions, personal and professional. Storytellers are trying to get recognition for the utter chaos of their life, as opposed to the resilience of the human spirit, which is underscored in the restitution narrative. Characteristically, chaos stories can only be told in words and can only be lived. Stories are reconstructed once some distance from the chaos has been achieved. The quest narrative gives the storyteller their most distinctive voice. Many quest stories are published, but the quest narrative is also apparent in other forms, such as patient advocacy. The various sufferings of illness are told, physical, emotional and social. At the core of the quest narrative is a transformation. The author identifies three types of quest narrative: memoir, manifesto and auto-mythology. Memoirs are the autobiographical storytelling device, combining illness with other events in a person's life. The manifesto is the least gentle of the quest narrative. The truth that is learned is prophetic and often carries demands for social action, insisting that illness is a social issue, not simply a personal affliction. Auto-mythology draws on the imagery of the phoenix reinventing itself from the ashes of fire of its own body. It is the story of a person who has not only survived illness but has been reborn. Individual change is emphasised over political. The Wounded Storyteller is a theoretical yet thought-provoking testimony to the importance of storytelling in illness. It is clear that illness stories shape our communities and personal relationships, but are also imperative in guiding new approaches to healthcare and health outcomes. The core focus in The Wounded Storyteller is on the patient storyteller, but who tells the story when the storyteller is unable to? How can the gaps be filled for the storyteller? I was interested to learn of an innovative new practice at the Bendigo Health ICU called patient diaries. The hospital is the only regional hospital in Australia to implement the patient diaries in ICU, which is based on a concept developed in Europe and in Scandinavia. Studies have shown that high levels of anxiety and the development of post-traumatic stress disorder are significant problems for patients following an admission to intensive care. Lack of memory or vivid nightmares, delusions and hallucinations around the events in ICU all compromise recovery of the patient. Each ICU patient has a diary started for them when they are admitted. The diary is for all people who have contact with the patient, families, staff, cleaners, volunteers, and anyone who would like to write something down during the patient's stay. The aim is to fill the gaps for the patient. Everyday language is used and writers are encouraged to write about events, interests, the environment, or even private communications. The diary is made available to the patient on their discharge and is at the discretion of the patient to accept the diary or not. The experience of the ICU diaries has been positive. One of the themes to have arisen through subsequent studies of ICU diaries is sharing the presence of a patient as a person through the diary entries. This concept is reflected in The Wounded Storyteller, where a person's story transcends the body or the it to be treated. The gap-filling intention of ICU patient diaries is perhaps the missing link in the author's chaos narrative. As mentioned previously, the book explains that the chaos narrative can only be lived and retold from a distance once the chaos of illness has subsided. In patient diaries, those around the patient are chronicling the chaos for them. The author speaks about the proliferation of self-stories in popular culture. There is a market for readers who find that storytelling addresses their own lives. This proliferation extends beyond the written word into the online sphere, where illness narratives are written and updated and rewritten and broadcasted via Facebook, Twitter, blogs, and of course YouTube. The impact of illness stories can extend beyond the usual voyeuristic curiosities of online audiences and have a greater public health benefit. The case of the fully sick rapper, Christian Van Vuren, is an example of how a personal narrative can propel the patient through the wreckage of illness to a new life and also reach a broader audience and influence public health promotion. Sydney-bound Christian was diagnosed with drug-resistant tuberculosis in 2009 and spent 6 months quarantined in a 4x3 metre hospital room, not knowing how long it would take for the cocktail of drugs to kill the infection in his lungs. To fight the boredom, he wrote a rap about being sick and made a video for the song which was posted to YouTube. He was an overnight sensation and was quickly dubbed the fully sick rapper. Battling indefinite incarceration, depression, paranoia, double vision and tinnitus, side effects from the drugs, Christian chronicled his experience in a series of videos which he posted to YouTube. His videos journey through each of the Wounded Storyteller's narrative styles, from restitution to chaos and ultimately the quest narrative. He has become almost an ambassador for tuberculosis, breaking down the stigma that exists around the world about TB. Following the success of his videos, he was contacted by the World Health Organization to help raise awareness for World TB Day. In his final chapters of the book, the author introduces the concept of the pedagogy of suffering to describe what the ill have to teach society. He quotes a passage from a woman's testimony of her chronic pain. All these people suffering. We walk in different dimensions. We have access to different experiences, different knowledges. What would happen if we all knew what it really meant, and we all lived as if it really mattered, which it does? We could help the normal and the white coats both. We could help them see that they're wasting the precious moments of their lives. I'm convinced only sick people know what health is, and they know it by its very loss. This passage gives life to the idea of the pedagogy of suffering. Agency is restored to ill people, and testimony is given equal place alongside professional expertise. The author explains that testimony does not replace modern medicine and supporting theories such as Talcott Parsons' sick role. But what testimony does is open the possibility for shifting between frameworks as required to respond to the ill. As I've discussed in my 3 examples, the testimony of illness narrative does have the power to heal from a personal and psychosocial perspective, but it also has the power to cause change in society. This goes to the core of the book. How can lives be affected by stories?